I'm just going to quickly talk you through the compressor that comes bundled with Logic. It's a very capable processor. It's a very good compressor. It sounds great. It's got a lot more going on than people realise, so I'm just going to quickly show you through it now. I've just got a quick drum loop that I've dragged in from the loop library. It's just a very basic drum pattern, and I've just got it looping through so we can hear the compression going as we listen to all the different settings we've got. I've just literally inserted the compressor over the channel here just by click holding in there, going down to dynamics, going to compressor and instantiating it like that. That's exactly what you do, and to get rid of it just click hold again, no plugin, and it will disappear. So most of the settings are as you'll find on the majority of compressors. You've got the attack and the release, you've got the ratio, which is expressed in values to 1. So I'm going to set this to around 4:1, which means that over the set threshold that we set here, any value that goes above the set threshold, so if we set the threshold to minus 20 dBs, for example, any sound that goes over minus 20 decibels is going to be compressed by the set ratio. So the ratio expresses the value of the input to the output. So if the input is 4 decibels over the threshold, it will only be output as 1 decibel over the threshold, and so on. So the higher the ratio, the more compression is applied, and that's tried to be shown by this graph here. So the attack and the release are simply how quickly the compressor starts to act once the sound goes over the threshold, and once the sound comes below the threshold again, how quickly does it release it from happening. Now the knee is essentially changing this value here. At the moment you can see that we've got what's known as a hard knee compression, so that we've set it to minus 20, so as soon as the volume goes up above minus 20, it's immediately getting compressed. Now as we smooth this off, you get what's known as a soft knee setting, and you can see that it's more curved, so that it actually gradually starts to compress below the threshold and gets to the actual ratio setting a little way above the threshold. So it's a bit more of a gradual change. When you would use this is basically dependent on the source material. Soft knee settings tend to sound better on vocals, things that aren't quite so transient based. Transients are loud peaks like these, very, very sudden changes in volume that you'll find with percussive elements, things like drums, tambourines, bass, snare drums, things like that. Whereas the vocal doesn't have a huge amount of transients, or can some can, but a lot of performances tend to be a bit more even. So a softer knee tends to sound a bit better. As is often the case, use your ears. If it sounds good to you, it is good. I'm going to leave this back to 0 just for the time being, and I'm just going to open these up just for the time being. We've got these values here, peak and RMFs. This is how the threshold works. It's whether it senses the peaks, i.e. the actual, the physical maximum level material, or the RMS, which is the root mean squared, which is a mathematical formula that tries to equate what we actually hear. Our ears don't really work to peaks. They tend to work to the average loudness, which is what RMS is designed for. So you're basically telling the compressor as to whether it reacts more to the peak material or whether it reacts more like our hearing. So as I'll play to you in a minute, they can sound very different. You've got this gain reduction meter here, which will show you how much volume you're taking out of the system, and you can make adjustments to the gain at the output, find the average level you're taking out, and apply it at the back end here. There's a drop-down menu here. You can automatically add the gain up to 0 decibels full scale, which is dangerous. I advise you not to use this feature. A lot of the presets will come loaded up to that, and they can be very, very loud and distorting even. Little word about presets. I generally steer clear of them. The presets are created by the software developers. They will put a certain sound through, create a setting that sounds good for that sound, and save it as a preset. But as soon as you use that preset on another sound that has different volume and different characteristics, it's not going to sound the same. So presets are usually, I find, redundant, especially on compressors and EQs, because it's all source material dependent. So use your ears and set it as you go. You've also got a limiter at the end there, and you've got a limiter threshold, so it'll start to limit on the output just to protect the next plugin on the chain. You've also got sidechain, which we'll go on to in another video. I'll talk about sidechaining. And one of the most important things on this is the circuit type. You've got lots of different circuit types on this compressor that mean different things, and we'll have a listen to them and see which, because they all sound different. They all have different characteristics. They're trying to emulate classic compressors basically, and they all have different characteristics and sound better on different source material. So I'll have a listen to those in a minute. We've also got a drop down menu down the bottom, which I'll come on to just in a while. So what I'm going to do to start with is I've just set this to 4:1. I'm just putting the threshold down, and we're just going to quickly have a listen to this, and I'm just going to compare it. If I hit compare, it'll compare to my previous setting. So this is with no compression applied. Then I'll kick it in and we can hear what the compressor's doing straight off. So this is with no compression, and I'm just going to add it in now. So we can already see that I'm taking about 5 decibels down. I'm going to actually pull this onto auto gain up to -12, so the volume gets back somewhere near where it was before. So straight away I can hear that the kick drum's a lot punchier, and the snare, I can really hear that the compressor's taking hold of it now. It's kind of sucking the life out of it a little bit. So it's quite a lot of compression applied. This is probably more than I'd ever add, but I'm mainly doing it so that you can hear the characteristic different sounds of the different compression algorithms. So the first one we've got is Platinum. Now this was based on one of the original Logic algorithms for the compressor. So it's its usual kind of compression algorithm. That's the one called Platinum. Before I go on, I'm just going to show you the difference between peak and RMS, because they'll sound massively different. So this is with RMS, and I'm just going to nudge peak in a minute. So you can hear that the peak's really taking a lot of the sound out there. It's almost rendering the kick drum a shadow of its former self, really. So you can hear that they have massively different effects on the audio that you're processing. So we've got some other options here. The first new option is what comes out as Class AR. It's actually Classic AR, which is modelling one of the famous stereo compressors called the Neve 33609, which was a very famous bus compressor. So it was used to compress a wider mix of things. So either the whole stereo mix, you'd put it over the stereo mix bus, or on auxiliary channels where you were routing the whole drum mix, for example. So you could compress all the drums as one instrument, or you could put it over all your guitar mix or something like that. So it's very good for mixing complex stereo material. So we'll just have a quick listen to that, and we'll bypass, we'll go between the two so you can hear the differences. So you can hear that it works, well hopefully you can hear that it works a lot better and is much more faithful to the original sound than the Platinum one. To my ears, the Platinum sounds a bit pumpy. You can really hear the compressor kind of sucking the volume out of it, whereas this one really works well with mixing a complex sound with complex dynamics. It's making the drums a bit punchier, and you can hear more of the room reverb as well. If I play it again. So So at those settings, very nice compression. You've now got the classic AU, which is based on a very classic compressor called the Fairchild 670, which was still is in use today. Very, very expensive units, full of about 40 valve stages. Give up ever thinking about owning one. The one I used at this recording studio I worked at in London was about £30,000, and they're very, very highly sought after. Joseph Puig's got 2 of them, but then he works with U2, so I can kind of afford them. Again, this is a very nice kind of compressor. It's useful for vocals, bass, drums. It's one of those compressors that will hopefully, well, is often used to impart a special sonic character on a mix, so it can add something that potentially wasn't there to start with. It's one of those things that can give you a bit of attitude to the mix, especially if pushed quite hard. So this is the sound of this one. Just compared to the original sound, so I mean that one sounds bombastic. That sounds really great, really big. Really, you're getting the punch of the drums, but it's really bringing up the background source material as well, so you can really hear the room sound. So as you can hear, that's giving what a lot of people call colour. It's adding something. It's really imparting a nice sonic character to the mix. One of the next ones is VCA, which stands for Voltage Controlled Amplifier. Now this is just a way, one of the ways that compressors can work. So you've actually, just like in a synth, you've actually got an amplifier that is controlled by a voltage, and judges it from the input material, and will get the amp to turn the sound up or down at the gain reduction stage. Now this one is trying to emulate a couple of classic compressors. One was the SSL G series master bus compressor, which was featured on all the big mixing desks, the SSLs, as standard, and everything could be routed through it. And it's one of those compressors that's in the Hall of Fame, really, as being one of those ones that glues a whole mix together, and lots of people consider it the sound of kind of 80s, 70s, 80s, 90s rock material. A lot of those classic rock albums were recorded on SSL desks, and their sound was due in part to the compressor that everything was routed through as standard. Another compressor that uses this type of gain reduction is the DBX 160, again, which is a nice classic compressor. These compressors sound great on buses, just like the classic AR, which is modelled on the 33609. So these are good at compressing full mixes, drum mixes. At the end of the day, there's no real, you must use this type of circuit on drums, you must use this type of circuit on bass. It's whatever it sounds good, but these are what these classic compressors were often used for. So if you're after an idea, you can hunt around and go, oh well, this one's used on SSL, so let's have a look. So let's have a listen to this one. So to my ears, that does a lot of things. It brings the real punch of the drums out, but it also actually, believe it or not, brings up a lot of the room reverb to my ears on the kick drum. So if you actually listen to the original, this is with no compression, and if you listen to the kick drum reverb, so again, nice sounding compressor, just another different sonic flavour. FET is the next choice, which stands for Field Effect Transistor, another way of getting gain reduction. Now this type of gain reduction circuit was employed in the very, very, very famous compressor, the Uri and later Universal Audio 1176 series of compressors, which are very, very famous, very fast compressors, and they're used a lot on bass guitar, individual drums as well as drum submixes and vocals, and this type of compressor works really well when you're using parallel compression as well, so it's a very nice sound. So you get a nice cracking snare sound there, a nice lot of punch as well to those drums. So yeah, that's a really common compressor still used today. There's some very classic compressors out there. That's probably one of the most famous ones you'll come across. The last one is the opto, which stands for optical. This is a special way that you got gain reduction in a circuit, which was actually to use a lamp, and as the audio coming into the compressor got louder, the lamp would glow brighter, and then in the next stage of the circuit there would be a photocell that would respond to varying light levels, and that would then be twinned to the gain reduction meter, so that the brighter the light got, the more the sound would get reduced. So it's quite a smooth compression algorithm, and this has lent itself to vocals and drum mixes for getting quite a lot of gain reduction, but it's sounding really natural, so you don't get a very pumping kind of character. You can get a lot of really smooth transient level response. This was used in the, again, very famous Teletronics, which has again later been taken over by Universal Audio. Their series called the LA2A. It's very, very famous vocal compressor. A lot of engineers consider that their go-to vocal recording chain. They will always put their vocals through one of these. Jack White uses it to the extremes, actually. He will push it so hard that it distorts. So it's used a lot. But again, about $2,500–3 grand for a unit. They're not cheap. But these ones you can really get if you've got a wildly different dynamic range in something like a vocal. If someone's screaming 1 minute and quiet the next, this can really work for you and take a lot of gain out of the louder peaks without it sounding like it's working. So again, really useful circuit type to play with, because this doesn't really sound like it's working much. So on this algorithm I could actually push it much harder. I'm going to up the ratio, pull the threshold down and make it pump even harder. So again, quite capable of producing some very, very different results, whether you want something just subtle beefiness, whereas if we raise the threshold here just to take a bit of the sound out, just to beef it up a bit, or if we really lower that threshold and get it starting to pump. So capable of quite a lot. So you've got lots of circuit types there, so do play with them. I see a lot of people using these and leaving them on platinum, and to my ears it's probably the worst sounding circuit type there is. I favour opto a lot, actually. Sounds really good, but again it's based on what you're using it for. I mean, this one works really well over the whole mix. This one will work really well on vocals if you want to just give them a bit of attitude. These work really great on drums. So listen through them just as we've done, and then you'll find one that you especially like. So I'm just going to leave it on opto for the time being, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to crunch it a bit more just to get that kind of pumpy drum sound. Because what I'm going to show you now is the extended parameters box down the bottom here. Now this is really what marks this compressor above a lot of the competition, actually, because this gives you some amazing tools at your disposal. And the best thing about this is that you can perform parallel compression on every track without having to do lots of complicated routing and copying of tracks, because you can do it on one track just using that one compressor, and you can do parallel compression. So it's perfect. At the top of the list is output distortion. Now, a lot of these classic compressors will distort, and especially if you're using the Opto and the Class AU algorithms, you'll find that if you have the attack very quick, you'll soon distort them, because they're actually they're working so quickly that they actually distort the waveform, and you will get clipping. Now, when the output goes above 0, you can actually introduce some soft, hard, or clip distortion, which helps you get a kind of analog character, and it can really warm up and give you a bit more sonic flavour, warm up the audio. So have a listen to that. There's no general rules for that. It's just what sounds good, really. And but they all work differently depending on how hard you drive the units and what circuit type you're using. But the next bit is the bit I want to get to, because you can filter the sidechain. Now, the sidechain of a compressor is what the compressor is listening to. So what we can do is we can listen to the sidechain. And what we can do on this is we can filter the sidechain so that it responds more or less to certain frequencies. Now, why is this useful, you say? Well, there's various things you can do with this. Imagine if you've got a bass guitarist who is not very consistent and might hit one string or one series of notes louder, or some of those notes might just be louder in the mix anyway. What you can do is you can EQ the compressor to listen to those frequencies more, so that it turns them down more for you. So you're basically boosting the sound of those frequencies in the sidechain so that the compressor works and detects them more, so will work harder at those frequencies. So you can get it to turn those notes down. What we can also do is filter out some of the kick drum. Now, this is what I use this for most times, especially when you're mixing complex stereo material like this with drums. What you'll find is that because compressors work on volume, i.e., you push a lot of volume into the compressor, it's going to turn it down. So, especially on drums, most of the volume comes from the kick drum. So as soon as the kick drum comes through a compressor, the gain reduction kicks in and pulls the volume down. And that can be detrimental to other sounds going on, like the snare drum, the room sound, and all the things like that. So what you can actually do is you can filter out some of the low frequency from the compressor so it doesn't react to the kick drum as much. Now, if I play it at the moment, what you'll notice is that the gain reduction meter is mostly working when we hear the kick and the snare. So after this second hit here, where we've got a slight gap, you'll see that the gain reduction meter basically turns itself off. So it's reacting to the transient material in the track. What this means is that the rest of the track is kind of being affected by what the kick and the snare are doing, and we might not be able to get as much compression as we like, or they're making the compressor react so much that if he was playing open hi-hats at the same time or playing the crash cymbal, we'd hear those sounds getting pushed up and down, and you'd get that kind of pumping sound. So what we can do is we can apply a filter, and under mode we've got lots of names for filters. So we've got a low pass filter, a band pass, high pass, parametric EQ, and a high shelf. So different ways of EQing the sidechain to make it react to more to different parts of the frequency spectrum. So what I'm going to do to filter things out is put on a high pass filter. So it's going to let the high frequencies pass, and it's going to filter out the low frequencies. Now, at the moment it's off, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to listen to it, and I'm going to hear what's happening at the sidechain. So if I now play it, you'll hear it a filtered version, and that's because of this frequency slider here. So all the way down at 16 Hertz, it's basically not working. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to filter this up so I can hear the mix with much less bass drum content. So that's fairly good. So I'm taking out everything basically below 110 Hertz. So a lot of the real power of the kick drum, which is sometimes around 50 to 80 Hertz, is getting filtered out. Now, if I put this on now, what we'll notice is that this gain reduction meter should not actually work that much when the kick drum happens. Just going to filter a bit higher. So you can now see that the gain reduction meter is working much harder on the snare hits than it is on the kick drum. And if I filter that even higher, up to around 200 somewhere, it should only really be working on the snare. Now, if I turn this off again, and you listen to the volume of the kick drum, now if I turn it on quickly, so we've got all the chunkiness from the snare drum and the room sound getting compressed, but not the kick drum. So you've got a really nice method of getting a real punchy sound here, but not affecting the kick drum sound. And this is just one of the many ways in which you can use this sidechain. So what we can actually do is now I can actually possibly get this compressor working even harder, because now it's not really working on the low frequencies. So I'm just going to get this sounding even fatter. And now compare it to the original. Now I'm getting a beefy sound here, but now the snare's sounding a bit like the life's getting sucked out of it. You can kind of hear it getting battered away by the compressor. So this is where the last little output mix thing comes in, because this is now your wet dry mix. So at 100% you're hearing all the sound getting processed by the compressor. At 0% we're hearing basically a bypass state. So now what we can do is we can mix between dry and wet in a ratio, and this is essentially your parallel compression. So now what I can do is, although I'm in 100% state, I'm thinking it's a bit too compressed, I'm just going to blend it back a bit, and I'm going to hear all those dynamics coming back, but we've added all the low level material. So I like that, about 45%, that's sounding pretty good to me. So I'm just going to do a final round of comparisons and see what we can change this drum sound to. So this is with no compression. And put it in. Sounded good. It's still a little bit congested, so what I'm going to do is, rather than change the output mix, I like how beefy the sound is, what I'm going to do is just raise the threshold a little bit to open up the top end of it. There you go, that's the compressor. I've shown you the main functions, also the main circuit types, which can have a radically different sound, as I've hopefully shown you, and also these secondary controls down the bottom here. So the main thing is to get experimenting, always use your ears, steer clear of the presets because some of them are really horrible, and yeah, have some fun.